Do you think, looking back on this, because this is really interesting to me. You mentioned you, you grew up in, I think you used the term sort of average middle class, but everybody else around you was the same.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that had some role in this idea of not ever feeling like there was something you weren't getting? Like everybody was kind of doing the same. You didn't have a lot of access to, the Kardashians on a plane. You like the Instagram, to overuse a metaphor. Like,
Absolutely. I definitely think that that was uh, that was a reason. And even, I mean, I think I must have been 8 or 9 when we got our first TV, right? Which was this small black and white. And in India, it would only there would be only one show which would come after the news, between the Hindi and the English news. So there wasn't a lot that we were exposed to. What was happening around in our community, that's what was available, right? And at that time also, India was a closed, like in terms of the economic, it was still a closed market. We weren't getting a lot of
mm,
things coming in from overseas. I remember the first time I spent 50 rupees and got a can of Coke for my
stuff.
sister.
You remember
I
that?
remember that because 50 rupees was a lot, right? And a can of Coke, you couldn't get it in the town that I was, where I grew up, but we never saw cans, right? We only had those bottles, and they were, and Coke, it was not available in India. So to me, I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting something overseas, like from foreign, for my sister, right? And it was like with so much pride, I got it for her. And we did not open that can for forever, because we were like, this is priced, like this is expensive, it's priced. But it's
Oh,
interesting how the perspective changes.
yeah, that's so good. That's amazing. How old were you when you went away from the small town that you were living in?
To do my undergrad, and I was, I think, 18,
Okay.
17,
And where did
18.
you go?
So I went, in southern India, there is a town called Manipal, and I went to do
Mm,
my hotel administration over there. I did my bachelor's
mm.
over there.
Just before that, if you had to describe your sort of like if you had to describe your relationship with money growing up to that point in one word, like what would you use? Your relationship to money in that sort of younger childhood phase of your life. What word would you use?
Modest.
Mm,
Yeah. But
mm,
it was, what was really fascinating was, since the time we were really young, both my sister and I, we had bank accounts.
mm,
Uh, Dad, we had, those checkbooks. Dad taught us how to write checkbooks, how to sign on that. He would take us to the bank, to deposit or withdraw. Because it's really interesting in the Indian culture, when people meet you for the first time, relatives meet you for the first time, they give you money, which is considered a blessing,
mm,
which happens in a lot of other cultures also, like Chinese culture, etc., right?
mm,
So that money which would come, we would not spend it. We would just put it in the savings. Like, I remember my dad had a lot of FDs which were set up for us, so that when we were ready to go to college, there were funds available to us.
mm,
So those
mm,
were things that we were all aware about, that
mm.
is what is happening, and that's what is going on. um
Isn't that interesting that the gift of money you relate immediately to, like, considered a blessing?
yes.
Super interesting.
Yeah. And there
Yeah,
is a word in Hindi which is shagun, which is also something that we've named our daughter, because it means blessings. But
mm,
usually that could be in terms of, like, okay, like somebody's getting married. Okay, this is a shagun for you. Like, it could be
mm,
money, it could be gift, it could be anything. But
mm.
it's always put in terms of blessings.
So beautiful. So you go away to school, and were you aware when you got to outside of the small town? Were you aware of your socioeconomic class in this new setting?
Acutely. Acutely.
How? Tell me
because
how.
because this was a school where, you know, at that time, hotel administration really wasn't very, it wasn't a cool thing, right? And usually they were kids who were not very inclined to studying who would come over there. Most of these guys paid their way through getting into that school, right? Even though it was one of the best schools over. So it was really interesting that a lot of my friendships were formed because of the socio economic class that everybody belonged in, right? Like
Mm,
the really rich kids, I had nothing in common with them, right? Like, they were
mm,
cars and they were scooters and all of that. I did not get that at all, right? And so even like the friends, our friend group was people who were very similar, like, similar
mm,
background as mine, similar economic. Like, even if we had to go out, right, instead of going to this really fancy place, we would go to this cafe and order one chai, and then divide it among the four of us, and we are like, okay, so I think that was really fun. I also do think that it made us a lot more creative in figuring out
huh,
how we could find our place in
mm,
the entire community, uh, by not losing who we are.
hmm,
And that I think that was very, it's still been very powerful, right? Like,
mm,
even now I walk into, like, into a room, and I know that there are things that I can afford, and I don't find the need to buy those things, because when I couldn't, I still stood, with who I was and what my talents were, and I can
mm,
still stand on that. It doesn't need to be based on money.
mm. Are there any stories that come to mind of that? Like how you sorted yourself out? Like the fact that you found each other, you knew those were the rich kids and this is my people. Like, do you remember? That's super interesting to me. How did you know?
I think, again, through food.
Oh, really?
It was, to me, I think a lot of this is because of food.
Oh,
uh,
such a surprise.
I know, surprise, surprise. But I think it was through food. It was the fact that we would be like, I would love to go and dine. Street food is my jam, and
Mm,
not only because of how flavorful it is. I really respect the entire art of it, because
mhm,
if you think about it, these street food vendors have such limited resources, and they can
mm,
coax these flavors out of such limited resources, is something which, like, I have mad respect about. so
mhm,
so that's that's how literally it started. Like, oh, I'm going to go and get some street food, do you want to come along with me? Yes. So
mm,
that's how it started, and that's how we started exploring. We used to take these really cheap buses to the beach, and then, of course, like, buy one beer, which we would like bury under the sand in the water, so that it would become nice and chilled, and then, like, the four of us, like, having a beer each, and you're like, you know so yeah, those were the memories.